Good morning to you. It's Thursday, and thank you for joining us for our Bible talk today, and welcome to the Vicarage here at Penn. Well, my friends, we say, or they say, don't they, that the two things you're not supposed to talk about at parties are religion and politics. Well, I have to say, in this morning's reading, we have both religion and politics in spades, you might say, and the encounter between the two. So without further ado, I'm going to go straight in there. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 14, starting to read at verse 1. At that time, Herod the ruler heard reports about Jesus, and he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him." For Herod had arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been telling him, "It's not lawful for you to have her." Though Herod wanted to put him to death, he feared the crowd because they regarded him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company, and she pleased Herod so much that he promised on oath to grant her whatever she might ask. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter." The king was grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison. The head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, who brought it to her mother. His disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So the overall context is that Jesus is going around spreading the good news around the Galilee area, and people trying to work out who Jesus is. And Herod comes up with this idea that, oh my goodness, it's John the Baptist who's been resurrected from the dead. And we get this kind of flashback to an incident with, as you heard, the death of John the Baptist. Now, it's a pretty gory story, and you don't think about it too deeply, but I think there are three things, I think, that we can gain from this, obviously, from this morning's reading today. Firstly, this. What had happened is, there were lots of Herods. The original Herod, Herod the Great, that's the one who massacred the babies at Nazareth. He was called Herod the Great. And he had, I think it was 17 children. And the eldest one was Herod Antipas, who took over for him, who's the one who's the king, as it were, in this morning's reading. And he was one of 17. And he was married to a lady, I can't remember her name, Lydia or something like that. Anyway, he had a brother called Philip, who I think was sort of son number 12 or something like that. And she was called Herodias, and she was also his niece as well. But he fancied her, so he took her off his brother Philip and married her instead. And so he married his sister-in-law and his niece. Okay. Anyway, basically this is an adulterous relationship. And John the Baptizer had the courage to stand up and say, "This is wrong." And that's why he was slammed in prison. Herod hated it because his behaviour had been exposed. Herodias, in a somewhat Jezebelic type of character, Jezebel type of character, because she was angry as well, because how dare this man say this against her, and so she loathed John the Baptizer as well. But I think what I want to learn from this really is that we need today to raise up men and women like John the Baptizer, who have the courage to say bold things to power. Herod was a despot. He was a bad king. He was a dictator. He was a puppet. He was only there because I'm about to say the Russians, because the Romans had put him there, and that's the only reason he was there. And so he was basically a weak king, and he was looking over his back, or looking over his shoulder all the time, and he was basically a very, very weak man, but given this title of king. But the wonderful thing about John the Baptizer, is he had the courage, as I say, to stand up and say, "This is wrong." And I believe that we need to pray to God that God would raise up men and women today of integrity who have the courage to say to people in power, even when it's sometimes dangerous to themselves, "This is wrong." Was it Desmond Tutu said, "I don't know what Bible people are reading when they say that religion and politics don't mix." I'm proud of the fact that we have 5 members of the council in regularly worshipping in our church. We need people in politics, but we also need people of the courage and the integrity to sometimes stand up to people in power and say this is wrong. So 3 cheers for John the Baptizer this morning, because he had the courage to say this bold thing. And let's pray to God today that God would raise up prophetic people like him today who have the courage to say no when something is wrong. And yes, when something's right as well, of course. That's the first thing. The second thing I think we can learn from this, and it's maybe blindingly obvious, is we should be careful not to make stupid or rash promises, you know. I mean, Herod, what a stupid thing to promise to his daughter-in-law. He couldn't give half his kingdom anyway. I mean, it was a stupid, rash promise anyway. But I think to kind of get the context of this, you've got to kind of see what's going on. You've got this great big party. It's Herod's birthday, so he's feeling happy. He's on a high. Alcohol is flowing. Everyone all the great and the good are there. You know, they're all kind of present. So feelings are running high. Adrenaline's running high as well. And for a weak man, he probably felt quite powerful at the time. Probably felt quite special and quite important. So he was being flattered too. So you've got all this kind of, then you've got the kind of the alcohol, the adrenaline, and all these kind of happy feelings. Pheromones are flying, and then you've got this daughter-in-law who comes in, who's actually not his daughter, but it's Herodias' daughter. So you can kind of imagine the kind of stepdaughter, stepfather relationship going on there as well. And she dances in front of him, and let's not understand this will have been a highly sexually charged dance. You know, she'll have been cavorting in front of him. So no doubt testosterone was flying around as well. So you've got all this high, and actually all this going on, this high, this party going on. Feelings are running high. You've got adrenaline, you've got testosterone, you've got alcohol. It's a pretty well-fueled concoction, you might say here. And because he gets carried away, in his stupidity and his over-enthusiasm, he makes this rash promise: whatever you want up to half my kingdom. What a stupid thing to say. He couldn't give it to her anyway. And so she asks for this, and then he feels he can't go against it because anyone in the kingdom has seen him make this promise. So he can't go back on that, can he? And I suppose the thing, as I say, what we need to learn from this, blatantly obviously, is to make sure that we don't make stupid promises. That we don't get ourselves in positions where we might make rash, stupid promises as well. So let's just be careful what we say. Our tongue's a wonderful thing. We do a lot of good with our tongue. We can also do a lot of bad with it as well, and Herod did. So let's just be careful. Remember, we're given a spirit not of timidity, but of power and love and self-control, thus says Paul to Timothy. We're not given a spirit of timidity, but power and love and self-control. And we need to learn that as well. That's the second thing. But the third thing is, at the end, John's disciples, after he's been murdered, they take his body away and they bury it, and they go to Jesus. Now, I think there's a little bit here. John was always clear in his preaching that he was preparing the way for the main man who was to come. You know, he was always going to say, "I must decrease so that he, the great one, can increase." He had to decline so that Jesus, and John was always very, very clear that he was only ever a forerunner. As you say very bluntly, "I am not the Christ. I am not the prophet. Are you Elijah?" No. I mean, he's quite clear about it. John was always clear that he was not the main event, but he was there to prepare the ground for the main event to come. You can imagine the kind of conflict amongst John's disciples, that they'd followed this great man, and John was now encouraging them to go to Jesus. And this is the point, I think, when if they had no doubt before, this is the point where they go and tell Jesus, and they join Jesus from there. This is the point where John finally decreases. John leaves the picture, and Jesus completely takes over here. That he has truly decreased, and Jesus has fully increased. And the main event from there on, the main impact here, is with Jesus himself. So, this interesting story this morning. It's a nice one to get you started on a lovely Thursday morning. But as I say, I think three things in particular that we can get from this today. Firstly, we need to ask God to raise up men and women today. Pray to God that he'd raise up men and women today of integrity and courage, who have the courage to say no when things are wrong and to stand up for things when they're right. We need men and women in politics. We need men and women who are prophetic, who are prepared to stand up for what's right and against what's wrong. That's absolutely clear. And we must pray for our Christian counsellors, we pray for people in politics, and pray for prophetic and brave people today. That's the first thing. Secondly, we need to make sure that we don't put ourselves in positions where we make stupid promises like Herod did this morning. It gets us into difficult positions. And thirdly, this is the point where John the Baptizer leaves the picture. From here on in, all the focus is on Jesus as we work then towards the cross and the resurrection in a few days' time. Hope that's helpful. God bless you. Do please feel free, by the way, to share these messages with your friends. Other people can